Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right in, shall we? You know O. Henry's classic tale, The Gift of the Magi, right? You probably remember it for that famous plot twist. The husband sells his prized watch to buy combs for his wife's hair, while the wife sells her beautiful hair to buy a chain for his watch. But here is the secret that makes this story so incredibly enduring. Its power absolutely doesn't just come from that surprise ending. Not at all. Instead, O. Henry relies on a meticulously engineered linguistic architecture. He's literally using the very structure of his sentences and his hyper-specific word choices to manipulate our emotions and crank up the situational irony. Today, we're going to look under the hood of this classic and see exactly how it's built. Here's our blueprint for today. We're building from the ground up, starting with the linguistic architecture, then exploring how myth meets microtransactions, feeling the rhythm of sacrifice, breaking the fourth wall, and finally, redefining true wisdom.
All right, part one, the linguistic architecture. We're talking about a deliberate collision. Moving right along to part two, myth meets microtransactions. Let's look at some serious financial precision. To really see this deliberate collision in action, where O. Henry basically crashes grand, elevated language right into stark domestic pragmatism, we need to begin the first layer of our micro to macro journey. Think about the stark isolation of this number, $1.87. In the opening pages of the story, O. Henry repeats this exact monetary value 3 separate times. He doesn't just casually say they're poor, he uses this incredibly precise financial denotation to firmly anchor the entire narrative in hyper-realistic scarcity. It's impossible to ignore the crushing limitation that this specific number represents. And he drills down even further with this line, 60 cents of it was in pennies. I mean, think about that for a second. This specific breakdown into pennies isn't just about math. It highlights the intense physical labor and the sheer indignity of microtransactions for these characters. Every single penny represents a difficult, gritty, face-to-face negotiation at the grocer or the butcher.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core lexical contrast of the story. It's like a linguistic tug-of-war. On one side, we have this exceptionally high-register vocabulary. O. Henry brings in grandiose biblical and historical allusions. King Solomon, the Queen of Sheba, the Magi. But then, he immediately juxtaposes this with low-register, highly transactional, and gritty vocabulary. Words like bulldozing, imputation of parsimony, and descriptions of a shabby little couch. By crashing these grandiose biblical figures into this gritty, penny-pinching vocabulary, O. Henry ironically elevates Jim and Della's modest, shabby little flat into a stage of mythical significance. Which brings us to part 3, the rhythm of sacrifice. This is where the text actually mimics human emotion.
Shifting gears from individual words to the sentence level, what's really fascinating here is how the pacing isn't just some random stylistic choice. The syntactic structure physically mimics the character's internal emotional states. Just listen to the rhythm of this sentence with me. Life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. Notice that heavy reliance on a tripartite syntactic structure? Sobs, sniffles, smiles? And notice the alliterative sibilants, those repeating S sounds that create a lyrical, almost sighing cadence? And then, look at that modifying clause right at the end, with sniffles predominating. The sentence just drags on, syntactically mirroring the lingering, inescapable weight of their grief and poverty.
There's this incredible asymmetrical pacing at play throughout the narrative. When O. Henry describes the character's sacred possessions, like Jim's watch or Della's hair, he leans into these long, fluid, compound, complex sentences. But the very second the text shifts to transactional dialogue, the style completely fractures into abrupt monosyllabic imperative clauses.
Just listen to the sheer contrast here. When describing Della's prized possession, the narrator slowly marvels, observing how her hair falls, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It's incredibly poetic and expansive, right? But when Della actually makes the heartbreaking transaction to cut and sell that hair, the tempo violently accelerates. She simply says, "Give it to me quick." Bam, fast, clipped, monosyllabic. The sentence structure itself accelerates during these critical sacrifices, giving us literal linguistic whiplash that perfectly matches the shock of the moment.
All right, part 4, breaking the fourth wall. Let's talk about narrative deixis. This brings us into the pragmatics of the text, exploring how the narrator completely alters the traditional relationship with the audience. So I want to pose this question directly to you. Why does the narrator talk directly to us? Throughout the entire story, O. Henry shatters traditional narrative distance. It's a technique known as narrative deixis, and it fundamentally changes how you and I experience the ending.
He does this by using what we call second-person vocatives. He literally addresses us as dear friends. He invites us in saying things like, let us regard a hashed sweater. By making these highly specific pragmatic choices, O. Henry is creating a conversational stance. He totally abandons the role of the detached, objective observer. Instead, he turns you, the reader, into a compassionate confidant. He makes you an emotional accomplice who is standing right there in the room with Jim and Della.
And finally, part 5, redefining true wisdom, the big semantic inversion. That emotional complicity, we absolutely need it for where we're going next, which is the climactic takeaway of this explainer. You see, the story culminates not just in a twist of events, but in a massive semantic shift driven by structural irony. Consider the definition of the word wise as it functions in this text. The word undergoes a complete transformational pivot. Initially, the narrator explicitly tells us that Jim and Della's actions are pragmatically foolish. They're described as two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. And honestly, based on the greedy microtransactional reality we talked about earlier, selling your only valuable assets is indeed a terrible financial decision. But by the final paragraph, the narrator completely inverts this meaning.
The structural irony flips the script entirely. That final paragraph redefines their sacrificial love, elevating these unwise children to the status of the ultimate Magi. The text boldly declares them the most wise. The linguistic transformation of this single concept, wisdom, is what redefines their actions. It proves that the story's enduring power comes from structural semantic irony rather than just a simple plot trick.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty profound thought to ponder. We've seen how O. Henry uses lexical contrast, asymmetrical pacing, and semantic inversion to build this masterpiece. But at its core, all of this linguistic architecture is pointing to a profound human truth. So, I leave you with this. If ultimate wisdom actually looks like a foolish sacrifice, what are you willing to give up today? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating text with me. Keep learning and keep looking closely at the words around you. Catch you next time.